Okay, so plan for tonight, we're going to finish the series by looking at how everything we've looked at so far fits into a broader picture of collective care and collective power, and developing some of the things that we would like to take away with us, and kind of take forward in our groups and in our contexts. So there is going to be a little bit of me talking, but also plenty of time to connect with each other and kind of finish the series together. That's really the aim of tonight. So I don't think I need to spend loads of time on this slide, but we're at the end. And we'll have a little bit of time in a moment to go through kind of what we've taken from each of these sessions and what we've looked at. But we've had, oh gosh, I think 8 or 9 sessions together over the last 5 months. So yeah, it's really nice getting to spend time with you all every couple of weeks. Hopefully you felt similar. So before we get into recapping, as I said, I wanted to finish the series by kind of underlining the connections between integrating collective care and building power together. So to me, everything that we've looked at over the last 5 months falls under this kind of broad umbrella of collective care. So accessibility and anti-oppression, facilitating with care and equity in mind, trauma-informed de-escalation, developing conflict resilience, and the collective healing and imagination that we looked at with Aroa are all integral for developing a culture of care. And collective care is also an opportunity to make our campaigns longer lasting and more effective. As I'm sure we're all aware, it can be really easy to get sucked into the urgency of what we're working on and feel like looking after each other is a distraction or something we don't have time for. But taking small steps can reduce individual and collective burnout and make it easier to work together towards our goals in a sustainable way. Collective care is also an important part of modelling the ways of existing together that we want to see in the world. We've discussed several times that often oppression that exists in our wider society can find its way into our groups and the way that we show up together. So collective care is both an opportunity and a commitment to work towards ways of relating to each other that we would like to see go beyond our groups. And collective care is also a really radical act. Colonial capitalism as an economic and social model wants us to think and act as individuals and to see ourselves in competition with each other. So choosing to prioritise care in our groups is a real act of resistance. Lastly, and really importantly, collective care has limits, and it's really important to recognise them. I think we've spoken about that as well throughout the series. Collective care is not a replacement for professional treatment and help. And as a group and also as an individual, it's so crucial to be aware of what your boundaries are in terms of how much and what type of care you can offer. So I really want to emphasise that. It's also something that will obviously vary a lot depending on your context and the type of organisation or group that you are in. Okay, so maybe some of you recognise this graphic from the start of the series. I think when we looked over it before, there was a bit of interest in revisiting it, so thought now was a good opportunity to do that. It shows a group onion, which is broadly representative of how a lot of groups function, with different layers of involvement ranging from facilitators and organisers at the core, and then supporters, one layer removed, and then observers at the outer. It's obviously not going to be a perfect representation of every group or context or organisation, but it usually does kind of broadly show the different people who interact in a space. Creating a healthy group means having mechanisms for people to move through these layers so that supporters can become organisers, organisers can become facilitators, and actually most importantly that there's space for people at the core or centre of the onion to step back. I actually don't know if onions do have cores, they're not apples, are they? But people at the centre of the layers to step back. So if we neglect group dynamics and group culture or collective care in general, we end up with an unhealthy onion. So maybe you struggle to get enough people at the core of the onion, and your capacity suffers as a result. Or maybe there's no mechanism for people to step back and pass on responsibilities if they need to, which leads to burnout, conflict, and resentment. So all of the skills and knowledge and experience that we've been working on developing around group dynamics are really important parts of creating a more powerful and resilient onion, which ultimately means that we can get more done. So for example, centering accessibility and anti-oppression means that more people feel at home in your group, so that you can grow the centre of your onion. Facilitation, which really looked at way back at the start, makes like good meetings make it easier for people to see how they can go from supporters to organisers or organisers to facilitators. And there's so many more examples from what we've covered, which we'll get onto a little bit more in a bit. This was another graphic that we looked at in the opening session, but kind of returning to with eyes of having gone through everything. So the chart is based on the original theory from Bill Moyer's movement action plan, but it's been the basis of a lot of more recent movement theories looking at cycles of escalation. So basically it shows how movements and campaigns go through cycles of growth and contraction with the various trigger events along the way. So our groups of movement will go through cycles of uprising and peaks, which are usually marked by high energy and momentum, and then followed by periods of contraction, which, when they're kind of in their negative state, can be associated with burnout or feelings of despair and hopelessness, and people leaving the movement. I imagine that a lot of you, or all of you, have been in groups or campaigns or movements where you experience a high level of energy and enthusiasm, which is then followed by a big dip, where some people might burn out or leave. And I know it might not seem immediately relevant for group dynamics, but for me, this theory of movement cycles really underlines the importance of building a culture of collective care in our groups and wider movements. That's because when it's used to our advantage, that period of contraction is a crucial point for rest, reflection, embedding learnings, and absorbing new capacity into movements. And healthy group culture itself is also crucial for getting us through those kind of ups and downs and continuing to build that momentum, which we can't do without the resilience that comes from doing this work. So some examples from the series so far, things like having good processes for reflection and addressing conflicts after a big period of activity can build more collective resilience and therefore power in the longer term. Or having good decision-making processes means that you can get more of your group behind a strategy. And the imaginative practices that we looked at a few weeks ago with the Rower can help to find shared visions for what you want to build towards together. I will just pause there and I'll pause the recording. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so I thought it might be useful to return to this word cloud that we made together way back at that first session in November. So these are all responses to that question: what's getting in the way of your group developing a more healthy and powerful culture? So as you can see, there was lots of crossover in terms of time and capacity. I think that's come up a lot throughout the series, but also a lot there in terms of conflict, kind of urgency culture, power dynamics, unequal spread of contributions, meeting facilitation, bandwidth, engagement, connection, not diverse, privilege, lack of community vision. I'm wondering if anyone is noticing anything there that I've missed, or if there's anything that you would add to that question now that we've reached the end of the series. Yeah, absolutely. And we discussed that quite a lot during those conflict sessions. And also, I don't know if you remember during Snook's session on de-escalation, that trauma iceberg. So yeah, interesting that that hadn't come up at the start, but is something that did come up quite a lot throughout the series. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else got anything that they would add? The internet cut out, so I missed a lot of that, but I got the last bit, and I agree, I think, from what I heard at the end. Yeah, I guess, correct me if I am misinterpreting it because I didn't hear what you said, but we were talking at the start about how kind of collective care is something that kind of goes against that individualistic, like dominant culture. And it's really hard to go against something which is like so pervasive everywhere. Does that relate to what you said, or did I get the wrong end of the stick? Okay. Phew. Okay, I think let's move on because I want to have time at the end as well. So we won't spend loads of time on this, but just before we kind of did our like wrapping up and takeaways, I thought it would be useful to have a little bit of a recap of some of the questions that we've kind of sought to answer. Also, let me know if my internet drops out again. Hopefully it won't. I actually might just make one of you a co-host just in case. get kicked out. Okay, so yeah, we started off by looking at what are group dynamics and why are they important. And then we looked at the role of facilitation. And then as part of that, we had a session on decision-making models, consensus and consent-based decision-making in particular. Then we had that recorded session from Emma Geen on accessibility and putting that at the heart of our organising. We had Christmas and a bit of a break. And then we looked at de-escalation with my lovely colleague Snook, and how we could use that in different contexts. Then we had those 2 sessions on conflict resilience. So the first one looking at individual conflict styles and how they kind of affect how we show up in conflict. And then the second one looking at developing conflict resilience in our specific contexts. And then we had that last session 2 weeks ago with Aroa, looking at collective healing and care, and kind of imagination. And that leads us to tonight. So we have about half an hour left. And I would really like to leave some time for kind of sharing some key takeaways so that we can end well together. I also would really love it if we could spend 5 minutes filling out this end of series survey. So I'll put the link in the chat as well, or you can scan that QR code and hopefully it will work okay. I know Mentimeter is sometimes a bit funny, so let me know if it's not working. I'll share a link so you can access it on the same device you're on now. I know they can feel like a little bit of a faff to do these surveys, but they're really important for our ability to kind of continue to deliver these trainings for free, and also to inform any future iterations of this series. So I would really appreciate the time it takes to fill that out. And the first question there is on takeaways, which is what we're going to finish up discussing anyway. So it's kind of opening up, maybe thinking about that as well. I will share the link now.